Good evening, book lovers. Welcome to episode 21 of Cath-Lit Live. I am your host, Amy Cattapan. You can find me everywhere on social media under my pen name, AJ Cattapan. Well, it's been a hot minute since I've done an episode of Cath-Lit Live. It's been a busy summer. If you follow me on any of the other social media outlets, you know that I have been very busy preparing a Catholic Writers Conference happening this week here in Chicago. And of course, my book on combating teacher burnout comes out in less than a month now. But today I'm talking with a different author. And as always, though, this episode is sponsored in part by my friends at the Hello Prayer app. If you haven't checked them out yet, definitely check them out. So many prayer opportunities on there. hello.app/cathlitlive. I'll put the link in the YouTube channel, and it is on my bio as well on Instagram. Please go check out the Hello Prayer app. So many different prayer types on there, including Ignatian spirituality, which we're going to be talking about a little bit today as we get closer to the feast of Saint Ignatius of Loyola at the end of this week. Today's author is Barbara Lee. She is a spiritual director with a ministry to the aging. She lives in New York City. She is a retired federal magistrate judge and a longtime member of the Ignatian Volunteer Corps, an organization of retired people who do volunteer work among the poor. She is the author of God Isn't Finished With Me Yet, Discovering the Spiritual Graces of Later Life. And she is joining us today to talk about her new book, Answering God's Call, a scripture-based journey for older adults. So please help me welcome Barbara Lee. Hello, Barbara. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So great to be talking with you tonight about your new book from Loyola Press.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about it? Again, the title is Answering God's Call, a scripture-based journey for older adults. So what is that about, Barbara?
Okay, there are a great many role models for older adults in the Bible. That is, people who experienced a call to holiness later in life. And this book presents 22 of them. And each chapter includes the relevant scripture passage in full, so you don't have to be shifting back and forth to a Bible. And there's a little background information and what I call prayer starters, questions or suggestions that help the reader to explore how God may be calling that person here and now.
Nice. Okay, so who's the audience for this book? The title says for older adults. I'm going to let you explain.
Okay, the primary audience is indeed older adults, which includes retirees, empty nesters, caregivers, people who have experienced some of the losses that come with aging, like physical disabilities and the loss of people we love. Now, these events can happen anytime in life, but they become much more common as we grow older. I think that this book should also be of interest to people who minister to older adults, both clergy and lay, because many of them are a lot younger than the people they minister to, and they need to understand them a little better. And finally, I think this just might be of interest to the adult children and grandchildren of older adults. Pope Francis has talked a lot lately about the importance of intergenerational connections and understanding. This might be a tool.
Yeah, we just had that special Grandparents' Day, right? With our Feast of St. Anne. And
That's right. Well, you know, he's one of us. Pope Francis is an older adult, and he's a wonderful example because he has so many young ideas.
Yes, absolutely. So who are some of these biblical figures that are included in their book, and how did you decide which ones to include?
Okay, first there's Abram, who was 75 years old when God called him to leave everything and set out for an unknown destination. So Abram is an example of the call to trust. And the sort of mirror image of Abram is St. Paul, who lived such an active life that it's exhausting to read about it. If you try to read through the Acts of the Apostles, it's amazing.
He traveled a lot. You look at those maps that show all of his journeys.
Well, yes, and it wasn't pleasure travel. I mean, he was shipwrecked and beaten and arrested. But he had to spend the last 2 years of his life living alone under house arrest in Rome. So Paul is an example of the call to accept change. Among the women, there's Naomi, the mother-in-law of Ruth, who was called upon to accept being served instead of serving. And that's a big challenge for a lot of older adults. And then there are two women who are called to generosity. There's Lydia, who was rich, and there's the widow of Zarephath, who was extremely poor. And the prayer starters for that chapter encourage the reader to think about generosity as something other than giving material goods or money. We can be generous with our time, with our energy, with our prayer, with our love. So those are some examples.
Those are some great examples. I've been doing that. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Father Mike Schmitz has been doing a Bible in a Year podcast, and it's really been helping me go back, especially with my Old Testament. I feel like I know the New Testament so better. So now as you're mentioning some of these Old Testament names, I'm going, oh yes, I remember Ruth's mother-in-law. And it's people we tend to forget about, I think. And I think that's wonderful, your books, like bringing them out and talking about their importance and how we can still find them relatable.
Well, I'm so glad you said that. And some of the characters are very familiar, like Paul. Naomi is perhaps a little less so, because the emphasis is always on Ruth whenever there's preaching about that. Lydia is familiar to people who really know the Acts of the Apostles, but not everybody who just hears the Bible in church on Sunday. And then there are a few that may be very new to people, like Naaman the Syrian and the widow of Zarephath. And Miriam, do you know about Miriam? She sang and danced, and she's an example of the call to creativity.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, well, it sounds like there's lots of great biblical figures that people can read about in there. Let's talk now about what this has to do with the Ignatian tradition, because I know you and I talked right before we went on the air. We both have Ignatian connections.
Right,
so can you explain what this whole praying with scripture in the Ignatian tradition is like for those people who might not have the background we have?
Yes, okay. Praying with scripture in the Ignatian tradition, we engage our hearts, not just our minds. And what we try to do is place ourselves in the situation and find a character that we identify with in the story. Now, in these stories, it's probably usually going to be the principal character, but if you take the Gospel of the Sunday, it could be somebody else. Anyway, so we focus on that character. What is he or she feeling? What graces does he or she receive? And how does that relate to my situation? So, for example, when I immerse myself in the situation, what is God saying? Now, take Abram, for example. I'm not being called to leave everything, but I am being called to trust. Am I able to trust? Or do I give in to anxiety? Praying with Naomi. Being served, being cared for is very difficult for a lot of older people. It's such a role reversal. So how did Naomi feel? How do I feel when somebody offers help to me? Can I pray for the grace to be honest about where I need help? So those are a couple of examples. Now, the examples that I've given have to do with stories where we can really relate to the images and to the feelings of a person. Now, some Bible passages lend themselves better to focusing on words rather than images. And that's Lectio Divina, which is usually translated as holy reading. But what we do is we find a word or a phrase in the passage that really resonates, that seems to stand out. So we sit with it and we savor it and we ask God, what's the grace in this? What are you asking me to learn from this word or phrase? What are you asking me to do? Now, that's a very brief summary of a subject about which whole books have been written.
Right.
But there is a discussion in one of the early chapters of Answering God's Call for people who may be new to this form of prayer. You're not just thrown into the water and told to swim.
Yeah, right. That's wonderful. And what, as we were talking about before, what great timing. We've got the Feast of St. Ignatius of Loyola coming up at the end of this month, the 500th anniversary of his cannonball moment. So perfect time to go check out your book and learn more about Ignatian spirituality.
Yes.
Well, before I let you go, Barbara, where would you recommend people go if they want to learn more about you and your books? Is there a website? Should they go to Loyola Press? What would you recommend?
Oh dear, I don't have a website. You know, I had a very late call to spiritual direction, as you saw from my biography. I was a retired judge enjoying retirement. And so the writing came after that. Loyola Press has information. There's a brief biography on Amazon.com. And, you know, that's about all I can suggest. I probably ought to have a website, but I don't.
It's okay. We're trusting that you're doing all that you're supposed to be doing. And I think your book's gonna just fill such a great need out there and bring a lot of comfort and grace to a lot of people, Barbara.
I hope so, because older adults are underserved in many ways. And Pope Francis is trying to change that. So this is my teeny tiny contribution to that effort.
That's right. Well, all of us authors, we're pens, right, in God's hand, right? We just try to be the pen in God's hand.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Barbara.
Well, thank you for inviting me. God bless you. Bye-bye now.
Right. Take care. We'll wave goodbye to Barbara. And thank you all for joining me once again for Cath-Lit Live. I will be back in August with some more episodes. So make sure that you come and check it out. And if you have read Barbara's book or any of her books, you know, go ahead and leave her some comments, give her a little bit of love. So happy reading, everybody. Until next time, take care.